The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty reservation road as three small figures walked hand in hand toward the massive iron gates of the Harrison Ranch. 8-year-old Maria clutched her younger brother, Diego's hand tightly, while 6-year-old Sophia pressed close to her sister's other side. Their clothes were patched and faded, their shoes worn thin from countless miles of walking, but their dark eyes burned with determination. The Harrison Ranch stretched as far as the eye could see, with white fences marking endless pastures where prize cattle grazed on emerald grass that seemed impossible in this drought-stricken region. The main house sat like a palace on a hill, its red tile roof gleaming in the sunlight, surrounded by manicured gardens that required more water in a day than their entire village had in a week. Maria had heard the stories about Samuel Harrison from the adults who whispered in their native tongue when they thought children weren't listening. He was the richest man in 3 counties, they said. His family had owned this land for generations, growing wealthier while the nearby reservation struggled with poverty, unemployment, and now the worst drought in living memory. Some called him fair but distant. Others whispered darker things about how his ancestors had acquired so much land. The children had been walking since dawn, their grandmother's final words echoing in their minds. "The white man's medicine costs more money than our entire family will see in 10 years, she had said, her weathered face creased with pain and resignation. "But maybe, just maybe, if you ask with pure hearts, someone will help." She had kissed each of their foreheads with lips that felt like paper, her breathing labored and weak. As they approached the gate, Maria's stomach twisted with nervousness, but she thought of their grandmother lying on her thin mattress in their one-room adobe house, growing weaker each day. The medicine the doctor in town had prescribed might save her life, but the price tag might as well have been $1 million to their family. Their parents worked when they could find jobs, but steady employment was scarce on the reservation, and what little they earned barely kept food on the table. A security guard emerged from the gatehouse, his uniform crisp and his expression stern. He was a large man with graying hair and suspicious eyes that looked the children up and down with obvious disapproval. "You kids lost?" he asked, though his tone suggested he knew exactly why they were there and didn't approve. Maria stepped forward, her chin raised despite her trembling hands. "We need to see Mr. Harrison, please, sir. It's very important." The guard snorted, a sound that made Sophia flinch and move closer to her siblings. "Mr. Harrison doesn't see just anyone, especially not—" He paused, his meaning clear without finishing the sentence. "You kids need to run along home now. This is private property. Please," Diego spoke up, his voice small but brave. "Our grandmother is very sick. We just want to ask for help." The guard's expression hardened further. "Look, kids, I'm sure your grandmother is sick, but Mr. Harrison gets dozens of sob stories every week. He can't help everyone. Now go on, get out of here before I call someone to come get you." But the children didn't move. They had walked 12 miles in the heat, their feet blistered and their throats dry, and they weren't going to give up so easily. Maria had promised their grandmother she would try everything, and she meant to keep that promise. "We'll wait," Maria said simply, settling down on the dusty ground beside the gate. Diego and Sophia followed her lead, their small forms creating a picture that would have moved most hearts. But the guard just shook his head and returned to his air-conditioned booth. Hours passed under the merciless sun. The children had no water, no food, and no shelter, but they remained steadfast in their vigil. Occasionally, expensive cars would come and go through the gates, their occupants barely glancing at the 3 small figures huddled by the entrance. The children watched each vehicle hopefully, wondering if one might contain the man who could save their grandmother. By midday, the heat was becoming dangerous. Sophia's lips were cracked and dry, and Diego swayed slightly where he sat. Maria felt dizzy herself, but she refused to show weakness. She began to tell her siblings stories their grandmother had taught her, tales of their ancestors who had survived much worse hardships with courage and dignity. "Long ago," she whispered, "our people knew how to find water in the desert and food where others saw only emptiness. They were strong because they carried love in their hearts and hope in their spirits." Her voice was hoarse, but she continued, "Grandmother says that when you ask for help with a pure heart, the universe listens." A ranch hand driving a pickup truck slowed as he passed the gate, taking in the sight of the 3 children who had been sitting there for hours. He seemed to hesitate, perhaps considering stopping, but ultimately drove on. Another hour passed, then another. Just as the sun reached its peak and the children began to fear they might faint from heat and thirst, a different kind of vehicle approached the gate from inside the ranch. It was a simple, dust-covered Jeep, not one of the luxury cars they had seen earlier. The vehicle stopped and a man stepped out. He was tall and weathered, with silver hair and blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were practical work attire, not fancy business suits like the other visitors had worn. He walked with the confident stride of someone accustomed to hard work and making decisions, but there was something gentle in his expression as he approached the gate. The security guard hurried out of his booth, his manner suddenly deferential. "Mr. Harrison, sir, I told these kids to leave hours ago, but they won't go. I can call the sheriff if you want." Samuel Harrison raised a hand to stop the guard's words, his gaze focused entirely on the three small faces looking up at him with desperate hope. He saw the determination in Maria's eyes, the way Diego tried to be brave despite his obvious exhaustion, and how Sophia clutched a small, worn doll that had seen better days. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The rancher studied the children with an intensity that made Maria's heart race. She had practiced what she would say 100 times during their long walk. But now, faced with the man who held their grandmother's fate in his hands, the words seemed to stick in her throat. Finally, Samuel Harrison crouched down until he was at eye level with the children, his expensive boots touching the same dust where they sat. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried an authority that made even the security guard step back. "What are your names?" he asked simply. And Maria realized that this moment would change everything, though she had no idea how dramatically their lives were about to transform. "Maria," the eldest child answered, her voice barely above a whisper despite her earlier courage. "This is Diego and this is Sophia." She gestured to her siblings, who remained silent but watchful, their dark eyes never leaving Samuel Harrison's face. The rancher nodded solemnly, as if filing their names away somewhere important in his mind. "I'm Samuel Harrison. This is my ranch." He paused, studying their faces intently. "You've been sitting out here for quite a while. The sun's pretty fierce today." Maria swallowed hard, her mouth dry from hours in the heat. "Our grandmother is dying, Mr. Harrison. The doctor says she needs medicine that costs $3,000. We don't have that kind of money. We were hoping maybe you could help us." Samuel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his blue eyes. He had indeed heard many requests for help over the years. People came to his gate regularly, some with genuine needs, others simply hoping to take advantage of his wealth. His usual policy was to direct them to his charitable foundation, which handled such requests through proper channels. But something about these three children sitting in the blazing sun for hours struck him differently. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said, settling more comfortably on his heels. The security guard looked confused by this unexpected turn of events, but he didn't dare interrupt. Maria's eyes lit up at the invitation to speak. "Her name is Elena Morales. She raised us after our parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. She taught us everything: how to read, how to cook, how to take care of each other. She tells us stories about our ancestors and teaches us our language so we won't forget who we are. She makes the best fry bread in the whole reservation," Diego added shyly, speaking for the first time since his initial plea. "And she always shares with families who don't have enough food." Sophia, the youngest, clutched her worn doll tighter and whispered, "She sings to us when we have bad dreams. But now she can't sing anymore because she can't breathe good." Samuel listened to each word without interruption, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. He found himself thinking of his own grandmother, who had raised him after his parents died in a ranching accident when he was not much older than these children. She had been the one to teach him about responsibility, about using his advantages to help others, about the difference between being wealthy and being rich in character. "What kind of medicine does she need?" he asked. Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "The doctor wrote it down for us. She has something wrong with her lungs and her heart. The medicine would help her breathe better and make her heart stronger." Samuel took the paper and read the prescription carefully. He recognized the medications. They were indeed expensive, but standard treatments for congestive heart failure and severe respiratory issues. The kind of conditions that could be managed with proper care but were often fatal without it. "How did you get here today?" he asked. We walked, Maria said simply. It took us 4 hours, but we started before sunrise. The rancher's jaw tightened slightly. 12 miles in this heat without water or food was dangerous for adults, let alone children. He glanced at the security guard, who had the grace to look ashamed of his earlier treatment of them. Are your parents working today? Samuel asked. Our parents are dead, Sophia said matter-of-factly, her small voice carrying a weight that no 6-year-old should have to bear. Grandmother takes care of us, but now she's too sick to work, and we don't know what to do. Samuel Harrison had built his fortune through careful decision-making, calculated risks, and practical thinking. But as he looked at these 3 children who had walked 12 miles to beg a stranger for help, who had sat in dangerous heat for hours without complaint, who spoke of their dying grandmother with such love and determination, he felt something shift inside his chest. Have you eaten today? He asked. The children exchanged glances. We had some water before we left, Maria admitted. We didn't want to use money for food when we needed every penny for grandmother's medicine. Samuel stood up abruptly and turned to the security guard. Open the gate, Pete. These children are coming with me. Pete hesitated. Sir, are you sure? I mean, what if they're just trying to... What if they're 3 hungry, thirsty children whose grandmother is dying? Samuel interrupted, his voice carrying a steel edge that Pete had learned to respect over his years of employment. Open the gate. As the massive iron gate swung open, the children scrambled to their feet, hardly believing what was happening. Maria felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Could it really be this simple? Could their long walk and hours of waiting actually pay off? Samuel gestured toward his jeep. Come on, let's get you something to eat and drink, and then we'll talk more about your grandmother. The children climbed into the vehicle with wide eyes, looking around at the ranch as if they had entered another world, which in many ways they had. The contrast between their reservation and this place was stark. Here everything was green and well-maintained. The fences were straight and strong. The buildings were solid and freshly painted. It was like stepping into a picture from a magazine. As they drove up the winding road toward the main house, Diego pressed his face to the window. Look at all the cows, he whispered in wonder. They're so fat and happy. And the grass is so green, Sophia added. How do they keep it so green when everything at home is brown? Samuel caught their conversation and felt another pang in his chest. These children were marveling at things he took for granted every day. Adequate water, healthy livestock, maintained property. Things that money could buy, but which remained out of reach for too many people, especially on the nearby reservation. We have deep wells, he explained simply, and irrigation systems that help during dry seasons. The main house loomed ahead, impressive and imposing with its Spanish colonial architecture, red tile roof and sprawling porches. But Samuel drove past it to a smaller building nestled among shade trees. This is the ranch office, he explained as he parked. I spend most of my time here rather than in the big house. Too much space for one old man. Inside the office, which was comfortably furnished with leather chairs and wooden desks, Samuel immediately went to a small refrigerator and pulled out bottles of cold water. He handed one to each child and watched as they drank gratefully. Now then, he said, settling behind his desk while the children perched on chairs that seemed too large for their small frames. Let's talk about exactly what your grandmother needs, and what we can do about it. But even as he spoke those words, Samuel Harrison was already forming a plan that would go far beyond simply paying for medicine. These children had touched something in him that had been dormant for too long, and he was about to make a decision that would change all their lives forever. Samuel reached into his desk drawer and pulled out his checkbook, the simple action causing the 3 children to lean forward with hope and disbelief. After 30 years of building his cattle empire, writing a check for $3,000 was routine, barely worth noting in his daily expenses. But as he picked up his pen, he paused and looked at the expectant faces watching his every move. Before I write this check, he said carefully, I want to understand something. You walked 12 miles in dangerous heat, sat outside my gate for hours without food or water, all for your grandmother's medicine. That shows incredible love and determination. But I need to know, is there anyone helping your family through this difficult time? Maria shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The tribal council does what they can, but there are so many families in need. They help with food sometimes, and they paid for the doctor visit, but the medicine... She shrugged helplessly. They said it was too expensive for their emergency fund. What about other relatives? Aunts, uncles, cousins? Our father's brother lives in Phoenix, Diego offered. But he has 6 children of his own and works construction. He sends money when he can, but it's never very much. Samuel nodded, understanding the picture they painted. Extended families stretched thin, communities doing their best with limited resources, and children caught in the middle, forced to become adults far too soon. It was a story repeated across too many reservations, too many struggling communities. He began writing the check, and the children watched in amazement as he filled in the amount. Not just the $3,000 they needed, but $5,000. Maria's eyes widened. "Mr. Harrison, sir, we only need $3,000 for the medicine." Samuel looked up from the check with a slight smile. "The extra $2,000 is for other things your grandmother might need. Proper food, vitamins, maybe some home care assistance. Getting the right medicine is just the first step in helping her get better." Before he could finish signing the check, his office door opened, and a woman in her 50s entered. She had graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, and wore the kind of clothes that suggested she worked outdoors. Her face was kind but weathered, with laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of someone who had seen both joy and hardship. "Samuel, I was just—" She stopped when she saw the children, her expression immediately shifting to one of concern and curiosity. "Margaret, come meet our visitors," Samuel said, setting down his pen. "Children, this is Margaret Rodriguez, my ranch manager. She pretty much runs everything around here while I try to stay out of her way." Margaret's eyes took in the children's worn clothes, their obvious exhaustion despite having had water and a chance to rest, and the hope mixed with anxiety in their expressions. "Hello," she said warmly, speaking first in English, then switching to Spanish. "¿Cómo están, niños?" The children's faces lit up at hearing their mother tongue. "Estamos bien, gracias," Maria replied, though her voice carried the weight of their situation. Margaret turned to Samuel with a questioning look, and he quickly explained about the children's morning journey and their grandmother's condition. As he spoke, Margaret's expression grew more troubled. 12 miles in this heat?" she said, moving toward the children with obvious concern. "You could have suffered heat stroke. Are you feeling dizzy at all? Nauseous?" She began examining them with the practiced eye of someone who had raised 5 children of her own and knew the signs of heat exhaustion. Her gentle attention brought tears to Sophia's eyes. It had been so long since an adult had fussed over them with such caring concern. "They seem okay," Margaret concluded, "but they need food and more rest before they make that walk back." "Actually," Samuel said, picking up his pen again, "I was thinking they shouldn't have to walk back at all. Margaret, do you think you could drive them home after we get this medicine situation sorted out?" "Of course," Margaret replied immediately. Then, studying Samuel's face, she added, "But I get the feeling there's more to this than just buying medicine and giving them a ride home." Samuel finished signing the check and held it out to Maria, but instead of taking it immediately, the little girl looked up at him with an expression beyond her years. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. Samuel set the check on the desk and leaned back in his chair, considering how to answer. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that her courage had reminded him of promises he'd made to himself long ago? That their love for their grandmother had awakened something in him that success and wealth had nearly buried? "When I was about your age," he said finally, "my parents died in an accident on this very ranch. My grandmother raised me just like yours is raising you. She taught me that having good fortune comes with responsibilities, that when you're blessed with more than you need, you should share with those who have less." He paused, looking out the window at his vast holdings. "But somewhere along the way I got busy building this ranch, making money, expanding the business. I started writing checks to charities instead of actually helping people directly. I forgot what my grandmother taught me about looking into people's eyes when you help them, about understanding their stories." Maria picked up the check with trembling hands, staring at the amount with disbelief. $5,000, she whispered. "This is more money than our family has ever seen at one time." "But here's the thing," Samuel continued, and something in his tone made all 3 children look up at him intently. "I don't just want to give you money for medicine. I want to help in other ways too, if you'll let me." Margaret raised an eyebrow, recognizing the tone in Samuel's voice. She had seen him make business decisions for 3 decades, but this was different. "This was personal. What do you mean?" Diego asked. Samuel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his ranch. I mean, what if we made sure your grandmother got the best medical care available? What if we arranged for regular checkups with specialists in the city? What if we made sure your family never had to worry about basic necessities again? The children exchanged glances, hardly daring to believe what they were hearing. This was far beyond their wildest hopes when they had started their journey that morning. But why would you do all that? Maria asked, echoing the question that Margaret was wondering herself. Samuel turned back to them, and his eyes held a determination they hadn't seen before. Because 30 years ago I made a promise to my grandmother before she died. I promised I would never forget where I came from or let wealth make me forget about people who needed help. Today you three reminded me of that promise. He moved back to his desk and pulled out another piece of paper. I want to do something that might sound crazy, but I want you to hear me out. I want to formally adopt your family. The silence in the room was complete. Margaret's mouth fell open slightly, and the children stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. I don't mean taking you away from your grandmother, Samuel continued quickly. I mean becoming part of your family legally, so I can make sure you all have everything you need. Medical care, education, a secure future. You would still live with your grandmother, still be who you are, but you would also be Harrison's. You would be my heirs. Maria felt the world spinning around her. When they had walked out of their small adobe house that morning, they had hoped for a miracle that would save their grandmother's life. They never could have imagined that they would be offered an entirely new life as well. The children sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Maria's mind raced, trying to process what Samuel Harrison had just said. Adoption, becoming Harrisons. It was so far beyond anything they had imagined that she couldn't quite grasp what it would mean. Margaret was the first to find her voice. Samuel, this is a very big decision. Are you sure you've thought this through completely? Samuel nodded slowly. I've been thinking about it since the moment I saw them sitting at my gate. Margaret, I'm 68 years old. I've spent the last 40 years building something incredible here. But what's the point if it all dies with me? I have no children, no close family. When I'm gone, lawyers and distant relatives will fight over this ranch, probably sell it off in pieces. He gestured toward the children. But these three have something I lost somewhere along the way. They have love, determination, and courage. They walked 12 miles in dangerous heat for someone they care about. When did I last do anything that brave for another person? Maria finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. What would that mean for us? And for grandmother? Samuel pulled his chair closer to them. It would mean that your grandmother would get the best medical care available starting today. We'd bring specialists out here if necessary, or arrange for her to be treated at the finest hospitals in the country. It would mean you three would never have to worry about food, clothing, or education again. But we would still live with grandmother, Diego asked anxiously. Absolutely. In fact, I was thinking we could build her a proper house on ranch land, something comfortable and spacious with room for all of you. Close enough to the main facilities that if she ever needed help, it would be right there, but far enough away that you could maintain your privacy and your family traditions. Sophia, who had been quiet through most of the conversation, suddenly spoke up. Would we still be Native American? The question was so innocent yet so profound that it stopped everyone cold. Samuel felt a punch of emotion in his chest as he realized what the little girl was really asking. In her young mind, becoming part of a white family might mean losing her identity, her culture, everything that made her who she was. Sophia, he said gently, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. Being adopted by me wouldn't change who you are inside. You would always be Native American. You would always be Maria, Diego, and Sophia. You would still speak your language, practice your traditions, and remember your heritage. I would never want to change any of that. Margaret nodded approvingly. Samuel's right, sweetheart. Your culture, your heritage, that's part of what makes you special. No one can take that away from you. Maria looked at her siblings, seeing the hope and confusion in their faces that she felt in her own heart. We need to talk to grandmother about this. She's the one who makes decisions for our family. Of course, Samuel agreed. In fact, I'd like to meet her as soon as possible. Margaret, could you arrange for Dr. Williams to come out to the reservation today with those medications? I want to make sure she gets proper medical attention immediately. Already on it, Margaret said, pulling out her phone. I'll have him bring a full medical team if necessary. As Margaret made phone calls, Samuel turned back to the children. I want you to understand something important. This offer isn't conditional on your grandmother's answer, whether she agrees to the adoption or not. I'm going to help with her medical care and make sure your family has what it needs. The adoption is something extra, a way for me to be part of your family permanently if you want that." Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes. After 2 years of struggle, of watching their grandmother grow weaker while feeling helpless to do anything significant to help, the sudden appearance of hope was overwhelming. "Why us?" she asked. "There are so many families on the reservation who need help." Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I don't have a good answer for that, Maria. Maybe it's because you three had the courage to walk 12 miles and sit in the heat for hours. Maybe it's because when I looked at you I saw myself at your age, scared but determined, facing a future that seemed impossible. Or maybe it's just that sometimes the universe puts people in your path at exactly the right moment." "My grandmother always says that everything happens for a reason," Diego said thoughtfully. "Maybe we were supposed to meet you today." Margaret finished her phone calls and rejoined the conversation. "Dr. Williams is on his way to the reservation with the medications and a cardiac specialist from the city. They should be there within 2 hours. I also took the liberty of arranging for a social worker to meet with us, someone who specializes in Native American family services. If you decide to move forward with the adoption, we want to make sure everything is done properly and legally." "What about school?" Maria asked suddenly. "We go to the tribal school on the reservation." "You could continue going there if you wanted," Samuel replied. "Or you could go to the private school in town. Or maybe you'd like to try both and see which you prefer. The point is you would have choices, options that might not be available to you otherwise." The afternoon sun was beginning to shift, casting longer shadows across the ranch office. Samuel realized that these children had been away from their sick grandmother for many hours, and she was probably worried about them. "I think it's time we got you home," he said. "Your grandmother needs her medicine, and she's probably wondering where you are." As they prepared to leave, Margaret packed a large bag with food from the ranch kitchen, fresh bread, meat, vegetables, milk, and other supplies that she knew would be welcome in a household struggling with poverty. Samuel added a cell phone to the bag. "This is programmed with my direct number," he told Maria. "If your grandmother needs anything at all, you call me immediately. Day or night, it doesn't matter." The drive to the reservation took them through landscape that told a story of inequality. As they left the lush, well-maintained ranch and traveled toward the reservation, the scenery gradually changed. Green pastures gave way to scrubland. Paved roads became gravel then dirt. Well-maintained fences were replaced by broken barriers or no boundaries at all. The children's house was a small adobe structure that had seen better days. The roof needed repairs, the paint was faded and peeling, and the small yard was mostly dirt with a few struggling plants. But it was clean, and flower boxes under the windows showed that someone cared about making it as nice as possible despite limited resources. An elderly woman appeared in the doorway as they pulled up. Elena Morales was small and thin, her gray hair pulled back in a traditional bun. Despite her obvious illness, the children could see how she labored to breathe. Her dark eyes were alert and intelligent. She took in the expensive vehicle, the well-dressed Anglo man and Hispanic woman, and her 3 grandchildren climbing out with expressions of excitement and hope. "Grandmother," Sophia ran to her, careful not to hug too tightly. "We found help." "We found someone who wants to help you get better." Elena's eyes met Samuel's over the children's heads, and in that moment, both adults understood that this conversation would determine the future of this small family. The old woman's expression was cautious but not hostile. She had lived long enough to be wary of promises from wealthy strangers, but she had also raised these children to be honest, and she could see in their faces that something remarkable had happened. "Grandmother," Maria said in their native language, "this is Mr. Harrison. He wants to give us money for your medicine, and maybe help us in other ways too." Samuel approached slowly, respectfully, understanding that he was entering not just someone's home but their cultural space. "Mrs. Morales, your grandchildren are remarkable. They showed incredible courage today and they've touched my heart. I hope you'll allow me to help your family." Elena studied his face carefully, looking for signs of deception or condescension. Instead, she saw sincerity in something else, a loneliness that matched her own fears about what would happen to her grandchildren if she died. Elena Morales invited them into her small home, apologizing in both English and her native tongue for the modest accommodations. The living area was tiny but immaculately clean, with handmade furniture and traditional decorations that spoke of pride in their heritage despite their poverty. Samuel noticed immediately how the children moved around their grandmother with practiced care, adjusting pillows and bringing her water without being asked. "Please, sit," Elena said, gesturing to the few chairs available. Her voice was weak, and Samuel could hear the labored breathing that indicated her heart condition was indeed serious. "The children told me you want to help with my medicine." Samuel settled into a chair that had seen many years of use but was sturdy and comfortable. "Mrs. Morales, I want to help with much more than just medicine, if you'll allow me. But first, let me say that your grandchildren are three of the most remarkable young people I've ever met. What they did today showed incredible love and courage." Elena's eyes softened as she looked at Maria, Diego, and Sofia. "They are good children. After their parents died, they could have been angry with the world, but instead they became my helpers, my companions. They have old souls and young bodies." Dr. Williams arrived just as Elena was speaking, along with the cardiac specialist and the social worker Margaret had contacted. The small house suddenly felt crowded, but Elena handled the invasion of strangers with dignity and grace. She listened carefully as the doctors explained her condition and the treatment plan, asking intelligent questions and making it clear that despite her limited formal education, she was nobody's fool. "The medication should help significantly," Dr. Williams explained after examining her. "But you'll need regular monitoring and possibly some lifestyle changes. The good news is that with proper treatment, you could have many good years ahead of you." As the medical team prepared to leave, the social worker, a middle-aged Navajo woman named Janet Begay, stayed behind to discuss Samuel's proposal. She had worked in Native American family services for 20 years and had seen every kind of situation imaginable. "Mrs. Morales," Janet began, speaking in a mixture of English and the local tribal language, "Mr. Harrison has made a very unusual request. He wants to legally adopt your grandchildren, not to take them from you, but to become part of your family so he can provide for them long-term." Elena was quiet for a long time, her weathered hands folded in her lap. The children waited anxiously, understanding that their entire future hung in the balance of this decision. "In our tradition," Elena finally said, "family is not just about blood. It's about commitment, about caring for each other through good times and bad. But I need to understand something, Mr. Harrison. What do you gain from this arrangement? Why would you want to tie yourself to our family?" Samuel had been expecting this question, but it was still difficult to answer. How could he explain the emptiness he had felt for years? The sense that all his success meant nothing if he had no one to share it with or pass it on to. How could he describe the moment when he saw these three children at his gate and felt something wake up inside him that he thought had died with his own grandmother? "Mrs. Morales, I've been successful in business, but I've failed at creating a family of my own. I let work consume me, and by the time I realized what I was missing, it seemed too late to change. When I saw your grandchildren today, I saw something I had forgotten existed. Pure love in action. They reminded me of what really matters." He paused, looking at each child in turn. "I'm 68 years old. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but no one to share it with. Your grandchildren have shown me that wealth without family is just numbers on paper. I want to be part of something meaningful while I still can." Elena studied his face intently. "And if I say no? If I decide this is too much, too fast? Then I respect your decision completely," Samuel replied without hesitation. "I'll still make sure you get the medical care you need, and I'll still help however I can. But the choice is entirely yours." The social worker nodded approvingly. "Mrs. Morales, I've reviewed Mr. Harrison's background thoroughly. He has no criminal record, his finances are obviously sound, and his reputation in the community is excellent. From a legal standpoint, this adoption would provide the children with security and opportunities they might not otherwise have. But," Janet continued, "I want you to understand that this would be permanent. Once the adoption is finalized, Mr. Harrison would have legal rights and responsibilities as their parent. You would still be their guardian in daily life, but major decisions would need to be made together." Elena looked at her grandchildren, seeing the hope in their eyes, but also their trust in her judgment. They would accept whatever decision she made, she knew, but she also understood that this opportunity might never come again. "Children," she said in their native language, "what do you think? Do you want Mr. Harrison to become part of our family?" Maria answered first, her voice steady despite her obvious excitement. Grandmother, he treated us with respect from the very first moment. He listened to our story. He cared about our feelings, and he wants to help not just with money but with love. I think maybe this is the answer to our prayers. Diego nodded enthusiastically. He has a nice ranch with lots of animals, and Margaret speaks Spanish, and they have food and water for everything. But most important, he seems kind, like he really wants to take care of us. Sophia, practical despite her young age, had a different concern. Will we still get to make fry bread with you, grandmother? Will we still learn our stories and our language? Elena smiled, the first genuine smile Samuel had seen from her. Of course, little one. No matter what happens, you will always know who you are and where you come from. The old woman was quiet again for several minutes, and Samuel could almost see her weighing all the factors. Her own mortality, the children's future, the risks and benefits of such an unusual arrangement. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Harrison, I am dying. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but the doctors have told me my heart is very weak. And even with medicine, I probably don't have many years left. My greatest fear is not death itself, but leaving these children alone in a world that has not always been kind to our people. Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. Mrs. Morales, with proper medical care. She held up a hand to stop him. I appreciate your optimism, but I am old enough to face reality. These children need someone who will love them and protect them long after I'm gone. If you are willing to make that commitment, not just financially but emotionally, then yes, I will agree to this adoption. The children erupted in quiet celebration, hugging their grandmother carefully and then somewhat shyly approaching Samuel. Maria was the first to speak. Does this mean we can call you Grandfather Samuel? Samuel Harrison, who had controlled million-dollar business deals without showing emotion, felt tears welling up in his eyes. I would be honored if you called me that. As the legal papers were prepared and the details worked out over the following days, Samuel threw himself into planning for his new family, with the same energy he had once devoted to building his ranch empire. But this time, every decision was made with love rather than profit as the primary motivation. He hired contractors to build a beautiful new house on ranch property, designed specifically to accommodate Elena's medical needs while preserving space for traditional family activities. He arranged for the best specialists to monitor her health regularly. He set up trust funds for the children's education and future security, but perhaps most importantly, he began learning about their culture, their language, and their traditions. He sat with Elena for hours, listening to stories about their ancestors, learning about their spiritual beliefs and understanding the history that had shaped their lives. Margaret, who had initially been surprised by Samuel's impulsive decision, quickly became an enthusiastic supporter of the arrangement. She helped coordinate the family's needs, served as a cultural bridge when necessary, and gradually became like an aunt to the children. 3 weeks after that first meeting at the ranch gate, the adoption was legally finalized in a small ceremony attended by tribal elders, Samuel's few close friends, and the extended ranch family. Elena, looking healthier than she had in months thanks to proper medical care, blessed the union in both English and her native tongue. Today, she said, 2 families become one, not because we are the same, but because we choose to love each other despite our differences. This is how the world should work. 2 years later, Samuel Harrison stood on the porch of the beautiful adobe house he had built for his adopted family, watching his grandchildren play in the yard with a contentment he had never known existed. The house blended traditional Native American architecture with modern conveniences, featuring Elena's bedroom on the ground floor with medical equipment nearby, spacious common areas for family gatherings, and a special room dedicated to preserving and teaching tribal traditions. Elena sat in her favorite chair under the portal, looking remarkably healthy for a woman who had been given months to live. The combination of proper medical care, good nutrition, reduced stress, and the joy of watching her grandchildren thrive had worked what the doctors called a minor miracle. While she would always need medication and monitoring, she was active and engaged, serving as the family's cultural keeper and Samuel's patient teacher about Native American history and customs. Grandfather Samuel, Sophia called out, running toward him with a school report clutched in her small hands. At 8 years old, she had grown confident and bright, excelling in both the tribal school she attended in the mornings and the private tutoring sessions in the afternoons. Look, I got an A on my project about ranch management. Samuel took the report and read it with pride. Sophia had written about sustainable cattle ranching practices, incorporating both modern techniques and traditional Native American approaches to land stewardship. It was sophisticated work for such a young child, but all three children had flourished academically once their basic needs were secure. Diego, now 8, came running up behind his sister. He had developed a particular interest in veterinary medicine and spent much of his free time working with the ranch's veterinarian, Dr. Martinez, learning to care for the animals. His gentle nature and intuitive understanding of animal behavior had impressed everyone who worked with him. Dr. Martinez says I can help with the vaccination program next week, Diego announced excitedly. He's teaching me how to keep the medical records organized. Maria, at 10, had become Samuel's shadow in learning about ranch business operations. She accompanied him to meetings with buyers, sat in on planning sessions, and showed a remarkable aptitude for understanding the financial and logistical aspects of running a large operation. But she had also maintained her role as the family's protector and organizer, making sure her siblings kept up with their studies and cultural education. The tribal council meeting is tonight, she reminded Samuel. Elena says it's important for you to attend because they're discussing the new water rights agreement. Samuel nodded, grateful for Maria's reminder. Becoming part of this family had meant becoming part of the larger Native American community, with all the responsibilities and privileges that entailed. He now served on several tribal committees, using his business expertise and resources to help address community challenges. The integration hadn't always been smooth. Some community members had initially been suspicious of his motives, wondering if he was trying to buy his way into their culture or exploit their traditions. But his consistent presence, his respectful approach to learning, and his genuine commitment to helping not just his own family, but the entire community had gradually won over even the most skeptical voices. Samuel, Elena called from her chair. Come sit with me for a moment. He joined her on the porch, settling into the chair he had come to think of as his own. Over the past 2 years, these evening conversations with Elena had become one of his favorite parts of each day. She had taught him more about life, family, and purpose than all his years in business school and corporate meetings combined. I received a letter today, Elena said, pulling an envelope from her apron pocket. From the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They want to feature our family in a documentary about successful adoption and community integration programs. Samuel raised an eyebrow. What do you think about that? Elena smiled, an expression that had become much more common since her health had stabilized. I think it might help other families. There are many children who need homes and many older people who have love to give but think it's too late to start over. The evening light was beginning to fade, and Margaret appeared from the main ranch house carrying a covered dish. She had become a regular fixture at family dinners, serving as both ranch manager and unofficial aunt to the children. Elena's famous fry bread recipe, Margaret announced, uncovering the dish. Though I think mine still needs work. It's getting better, Elena said diplomatically, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. As they gathered around the large dining table that could accommodate the entire extended ranch family when needed, Samuel looked around at the faces surrounding him and marveled at how completely his life had changed. 2 years ago, he had been a successful but lonely man whose greatest concerns were cattle prices and profit margins. Now he was part of something infinitely more valuable, a family that had taught him the difference between success and significance. The children chattered about their day, switching easily between English, Spanish, and their native tribal language. They told stories about school, about their friends on the reservation, about plans for the summer powwow, where they would participate in traditional dances they had been learning from Elena and other tribal elders. Grandfather Samuel, Maria said during a lull in the conversation, Mrs. Henderson at school asked me to invite you to speak to the business class about entrepreneurship. I'd be honored, Samuel replied. What should I tell them? Maria considered the question seriously. Tell them that the most important business decision you ever made wasn't about money. Tell them about the day you decided to help 3 children you didn't even know. After dinner, as had become their tradition, the family gathered in Elena's special room where she kept the artifacts and photos that told the story of their people. She would tell stories about their ancestors, teach traditional songs, or work on beadwork and other crafts that connected them to their heritage. Tonight, Elena brought out a special item, a beautifully beaded vest she had been working on for months. "This is for you, Samuel," she said, holding up the vest. "In our tradition, when someone becomes part of the family, they receive something that shows their place in the tribe. This vest tells your story now, how you came to us as a stranger and became our father and grandfather." Samuel accepted the vest with hands that trembled slightly with emotion. The beadwork was exquisite, incorporating traditional patterns with new elements that represented the ranch, his Scottish heritage, and the moment when their lives had intersected. "Elena, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly beautiful." "You don't need to say anything," she replied. "You've already shown us through your actions what kind of man you are." Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed and Elena had retired to her room, Samuel sat on his porch looking out over the ranch that now felt like home in a way it never had before. Margaret joined him as she often did for these quiet end-of-day conversations. "Any regrets?" she asked, settling into a chair beside him. Samuel considered the question. His life was certainly more complicated now. His quiet, controlled existence had been replaced by school meetings, medical appointments, cultural ceremonies, and the constant energy of 3 growing children. His pristine house was now filled with art projects, sports equipment, and the controlled chaos of family life. "Not a single one," he said finally. "Margaret, I spent 40 years building wealth and thinking that was the point. But wealth without family is just paper. These children didn't just give me purpose, they gave me joy." "And the community aspect? The tribal meetings, the cultural obligations?" Samuel smiled. "Learning about their history, their struggles, their traditions. It's opened my eyes to things I never understood before. I always thought I was a good person because I wrote checks to charities. But being part of this community has taught me the difference between charity and justice, between helping and truly caring." As if summoned by their conversation about the children, Sophia appeared at the door in her pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Grandfather Samuel, I had a bad dream." Without hesitation, Samuel opened his arms and Sophia climbed onto his lap, curling up against his chest. Margaret smiled and quietly slipped away, leaving them alone. "What was the dream about, sweetheart?" "I dreamed that you decided you didn't want to be our family anymore and went away," Sophia whispered. Samuel's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. Despite 2 years of security and love, the children still sometimes struggled with the fear of abandonment that came from losing their parents so young. "Sophia, look at me," he said gently, tilting her chin up so he could see her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm your grandfather now, forever. That means I'll be here when you wake up tomorrow, when you start high school, when you graduate college, and when you have children of your own. Do you understand?" Sophia nodded, some of the tension leaving her small body. "Besides," Samuel added with a smile, "your grandmother Elena would never let me leave. She's gotten too used to having someone else to boss around besides you 3. Sophia giggled, the sound filling Samuel with warmth. "She does like to tell everyone what to do." "That's because she loves us and wants to make sure we're taking good care of each other," Samuel explained. "That's what families do." As he carried Sophia back to her room and tucked her into bed, Samuel reflected on how much he had learned about love from these children and their grandmother. Before them, he had thought love was something that happened to other people, something he had missed his chance at. But they had taught him that love wasn't about age or timing or circumstances. It was about choice, commitment, and the courage to open your heart even when it felt risky. Standing in the doorway of Sophia's room, watching her drift back to sleep, Samuel Harrison understood that the 3 children who had walked 12 miles to beg him for help had actually been the ones to save him. They had rescued him from a life that was successful but empty, wealthy but meaningless. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There always were in family life. There would be school problems to solve, cultural traditions to learn, community responsibilities to fulfill. But tonight Samuel Harrison fell asleep in his own bed, surrounded by the sounds of his family sleeping safely under the same roof, knowing that he had finally found the treasure that had eluded him for 68 years. He had found home,